After working for an entire month, I have finally completed the rat mask that I said I would be working on, which in the video I posted just before this, I asked a few questions on parts that I wasn't really sure on how to go about, but I actually ended up changing the entire thing from what the original plan was. Just while I was working on it, I figured out certain things didn't work and certain things did work, which happens when you're doing a project like this. So for example, the entire video on the last one was me asking how I'd make the jaw move, with basically how it looks, which I scrapped entirely, and that was the part I was worried about, but I ended up struggling with other things in this project, which you'll eventually see. So starting off, here are all the materials I know for a fact I used. I bought extra stuff and things I wasn't sure I'd need to use because I'd never done something like this before. So I bought some stuff I ended up not needing, and it was a mess at first, but eventually I was able to do it. So for the way I began this project, I cut out a sheet of foam, I believe this is inch foam, and I wrapped it around my head for a base shape that I'd be able to use because I wasn't really sure about the size, and this is the only way I really know how to do it. I've been looking at stuff like this for a long time now, which is the reason why I was able to make this project. I've been watching videos on people who have made FNAF masks and stuff like this, and they look amazing, so I was like, I have to try this out. Now this stage was a lot more annoying than I expected it to be. I kind of just expected to glue the seam and be like, alright, move on to the next bit, but it just kept like opening back up, which obviously you have to hold it because hot glue, you know, sometimes in the heat it takes a while to dry, obviously. But man, it just kept opening up, so I used these little pins to hold them in place, and by doing that, that helped a lot. However, it did take me a while to get them all out because I had to use pliers because they were all stuck in there, but it eventually worked. Now the base I'm making right here I ended up not using because I made it way too small, which you can see pretty much right here. I realized my mistake, but I eventually ended up changing it. However, before I made the next base, I actually tried to like fix what I had, so I cut off a bit of the top. I used this extra bit to make like the triangles to close over the top, but it ended up being like messy and really stiff because of the hot glue. So yeah, you can see right now it looks terrible actually, but don't worry, I changed it and it's all clean in the end. So skipping to that point, this is eventually the version I made and removed the other two that I had tried making. And this one I tried to take my time on it. I tried to make sure the size was good. I cut the triangles and it worked really well. The top was smooth, which is actually the reason why I ended up changing the first one. At first I was like, oh, it doesn't really matter, but then I realized I like have to have it smooth so the head doesn't look weird. And here's all the remains of that bit of the project. All the video that you're seeing right now is basically what was done on the first day of work. And right here I actually did this bit in real time but sped it up a bit just so it wouldn't take as long. But here was where I marked my eyes on the mask, because originally it was a mask that I'd be able to wear, but eventually I had to change that entirely. And I made sure to mark carefully as to where my eyes would be and where the character's eyes would be. So with that, I make sure to do the other side, and then I sketch out what he will look like on the base and what I'll have to add and take away. In this part, I just tried to make sure that it looked okay. Eventually, the eyes ended up looking a bit too close together. I had to change them up, make sure the size was good. So yeah, he went through a lot of changes throughout the project, but here so far I'm doing a sketch of his face, making sure to keep it even and make sure everything is in the correct spot. And after that, here's what he looks like at this stage. He's a lot like larger than I expected him to be, which I knew that would happen because you have to add stuff, but like the base, I didn't expect it to be like super big, but I like it because he'll be cool for display. Which eventually, like I said, I'm not able to wear them, so the way I did the eyes at first to mark where my eyes were, eventually I didn't have to do that, but that's okay with me. Now right here is the start of one of his horrible stages, which is just like adding the base of what the mouth will look like and the cheeks and stuff and the ears, which I eventually do after. But yeah, this part will look pretty bad. Like he looked like something from the 80s for some reason. He looked like a weird robot elephant thing. But eventually, don't worry, I smoothed him out, that happens, but I was kind of worried when I was making them. I was like, oh no. And even though that happened, eventually it began to work out more. Right here, I actually had 2 sheets of foam, or did I add 3? Might have added 3, I can't really tell what's going on right here, to his cheeks. I think it was just 2, which eventually I might have changed in the end. I don't know, that's what I mean, it's hard to go over, because this is, like I said, the first time I've ever made something like this, so what I added, I might have changed before, the shape and stuff. So yeah, it was a whole like learning experience for me, which I'm very happy I did. But yeah, he went through some pretty bad stages. Like right here, he had the little cylinder on the bottom, looked rinky-dink, terrible. I made his jaw off camera because I was like, I can't do this anymore. Looking fine, you know, did some texture in there. But from the side, oh no. Like, at this stage, it was bad. Like, I was sitting there. Every night I walked by him and I, like, punched him. Because it was, he looked so bad. So I made sure to take a break, and then a few days later I came back and did the basic shape for the ears. Basically like this. I drew out where I'd want to carve and took some scissors and then took out the insides. Now, I specifically remember this night in particular. It was, like, a few days after I had started to shape him and stuff, and I took, like, a long break, and then one night I was like, alright, I can get back to it, and this is where basically all the stuff started to go down. Good stuff. That sounds like bad stuff. No, it was good. His face started to look more like the character himself. Everything was going together. The jaw was looking a bit nicer. In the end, like I said, when you'll see him, he's not perfectly accurate, like, at all. There are a lot of issues I dealt with during the project, so I had to change up a lot of stuff about him, but he still looks pretty cool. Now, this stage definitely took the longest, which is expected because you're basically shaping stuff, adding stuff, taking away stuff from the base to try to make it as accurate as you possibly can. So yeah, this part I worked on for a long time, probably like a few days and stuff. But yeah, at this night in particular was where I did the most. So I made sure to make his jaw like seamless with the back of his face. I tried to make sure that everything was stable. In his jaw, I actually put like a wire in there, just to make sure it was all put together. If I could have changed something at this stage and I didn't realize it, and I probably should have tweaked it at the beginning, I wasn't even thinking, was the top of his like nose and stuff. It's too slanted down. Like, in the end, he'll look like he's like staring at you, but like his forehead is closer to you and it looks goofy. So if anything, I would have made it like slightly up a bit, and then his mouth would have been a bit more open. But yeah, stuff like that is expected. I wasn't fully sure what would happen during this project, but besides stuff like that, luckily he is like recognizable. Like, I think it would be a bigger issue if you looked at him and people would be like, what's that from? So luckily it looks like him, like you can tell, but he's definitely off. Like, eventually I looked in the mirror, he's like kind of lopsided, because I didn't make it all even and stuff. I was just trying to get the shapes right, which for the first time doing this, I'm glad I did, as opposed to just trying to make everything even, because if I didn't get the shapes right, then he definitely wouldn't look like himself. So I did not pay attention to certain things as much as other things. Like I said, making sure he's really even, as opposed to making sure certain parts look somewhat accurate, if that makes sense. So right here I'm doing the other ear as well, and basically I made the first shape, I put a wire inside, and then I made a backing and then shaped it to look like his ear. Mine turned out pretty thick. Originally his ears from the game looked to be pretty thin, so they're not super similar, but at least they're stable, which is important. Now this part right here was a pretty challenging day for me. Now I'm adding like a bit of stuff to clean everything up and making sure there are no like holes in the foam. So that's what I'm doing right here, but I eventually test out the first bit of like material I was going to use for like his main coat, which was a satin, which if you've worked with fabric before, you know satin is a mess. It's thin, it has no stretch whatsoever. So it looked accurate to the game. Like, if you saw, this is here when I'm showing you what it would look like on the foam, it looks great, and it looks like how he would in the game. However, it ended up not working, so a few days after I did this part, which is making a pattern, which I didn't know what I was doing, by the way, so I just went for it. I eventually went to the fabric store that I live by, and I got some fleece over there, which worked out really well. Also right here, I completely forgot to put this on the material list. Then again, you don't really have to do it. I used a saran wrap, and then this is masking tape right here to make the base, or the pattern. And I didn't think I was originally going to do this. I was just going to put it over him and then eventually cut around where I needed to and like glued it in. But eventually I figured I should probably try to go for as neat as I possibly can. So eventually this is the main base I did, and then I cut smaller pieces out of the large pieces I have. So yeah, this is a point where I got pretty nervous to work on the project, because he was basically done as the base of like with the foam and stuff, so I left him for a while because I was so worried to work on the fabrics. I just didn't know what to do. And I bet there are like tutorials online. I know there are. There's a ton of stuff with people with awesome advice. But yeah, I left him there for a while. I was like, I'm so nervous, I don't know what to do. I wasn't sure if I should do the pattern or not, but with the materials I had at the moment, I decided I was going to. So I eventually split them all up and then traced them onto the fabric, and I tested out the satin first, because that's what I originally got. And obviously, as soon as I started working with it, I was like, yeah, this isn't gonna work. It would have been extremely accurate, and if you know how to use that stuff, I bet it would look so awesome. So if someone wants to make another, like, monster rat, or if someone's gonna make, like, a monster cat, because I looked around and I haven't seen anyone do these characters, which I adore them. Like, the monster rat is probably one of the coolest characters I've ever seen, which is why I wanted to make him for so long. So yeah, if anyone tries to make one of these guys, I'd love to see what you do, like the techniques you use, the materials you use. I'd be so stoked to see other people's works. So even though I'm out of frame and this stuff I ended up not using, what I'm doing is taking the pins I originally used earlier for the foam to hold it in place, to hold the fabric in place. And this helped me see how much I could stretch stuff and what I could hold in place when I eventually glued it. And right here, I skipped way ahead. This is the stuff I ended up using. It's great. And even though it hurt my soul to take away parts that would make him a bit more accurate, this definitely made him look 10 times more cool than he would have if I did use the satin, because he would have looked pretty bad if I continued with the original one. He'd look like a mess, a literal hot mess. So this worked out well, even though in my mind I was like, oh, he's not like fluffy. It's fine. It worked out, and I had to tell myself to work with it. So yeah, this part at the end of the day was definitely the hardest bit. I am terrible with working with stuff like this. I've tried to make like clothes before. I'm bad at stuff like this. I can't sew. The patterns like this was extremely hard to do. So at the end, he's wrinkly. He almost looks like a mask you'd see if you went to, like, I don't know, someplace where they have a mascot. So I worked with that. I made him more stylistic in that way, so almost like a hybrid between the character that Mary might have seen in game and then the monstrous, almost like living creature she saw in her nightmares. So I rolled with that. I decided to add like acrylic paint to do like shading. I made him look kind of like dirty and stuff, which at the end of the day I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't keep him matte. But yeah, I know when I glued everything down, I was extremely like upset with myself. I felt like I failed everyone who was interested in this project. But I just had to tell myself, like, this is your first time doing something like this. Of course, there's stuff you could have done and that you probably should have done during this point right here. But for my first attempt, I literally have to be like, it's not that bad. Also, completely off the record, I bought these online. Look at the name of them. The Superstar. They were so cute. But yeah, even though I think I've like talking about this a few times already now, these pins were like a lifesaver, and with the stuff I'm using now, it can stretch, which is extremely handy with something like this. You don't want to use stuff that like can't stretch around like the stuff you're using, which if you've done stuff like this before, I bet you know how to work with certain types. Like some people use fur, some people use like the fleece I'm using now. But yeah, I'm glad that I went with what I've been working with right now. And a lot of stuff towards the end I did off camera, like right here, I did the inside of his mouth and I eventually cleaned everything up. There's still some like chunks that are like stuck on him, which I eventually brushed off. But yeah, I ended up doing a lot of it off camera. I wanted to make sure that, at least in his stage at the time, I could make him look as cool as possible without having to worry about recording everything. But anyway, right here I am using polymer clay to sculpt his nose. It was a bit small in the end, but I think it looks cute. It's not too bad. The shape's right. It looks pretty accurate. I tried to look at a picture as closely as possible, and I eventually ended up changing the original base coat because I used a metallic paint and it looked cool. However, it was too golden, so I eventually took a brown paint and then washed over it to make it less like in your face. Now for a while here, I don't really have to talk about what I'm doing. I'm doing the nose right here, and then eventually I'll be dry brushing him with some black acrylic paint. But I actually purchased some fake like whiskers, obviously from like a costume or something that you could use, which was great because I wasn't really sure I was going to go about it because wires are like extremely like big. Even if you get small ones, it's iffy. So I was able to find these, which worked out great. But I definitely could have done a better job with those. I ended up using a fabric glue to glue them on, so they look kind of bad. I should have, because I wasn't able to pierce them through the fabric. What I should have done was use like a needle and poked through the fabric and the foam. Even then I wasn't sure if they'd work because they're pretty like flimsy. So I don't know. I mean, they're fine, they're on the face, but at the end of the day, like I said, there are definitely stuff that you can see when you're working on a project that you could have changed. But yeah, I kind of just wanted to bring stuff like that up because I know people notice, I notice, I'm the one who had to do stuff like that. But yeah. The part I'm doing right here was actually really hard because the paint did not want to stay onto the fabric, which, I mean, it makes sense, like, it's not made for stuff like that. But I used acrylic. I do suggest using a fabric paint, which I did have. I actually had like a a puffy paint, which would have worked fine. It's for that in particular, but I ended up just using acrylic, and it worked out fine. It just took a little while to get it on there. Now right here, I'm taking some EVA foam and I'm cutting out all of his teeth, which these are actually the second versions of his teeth that I actually made. Originally, I sculpted them using a paper clay, which is it's like an air dry clay, but it's super light. And I do suggest it, but for his teeth in particular, I wanted to be able to cut them out and make them triangular, because that's how his teeth look in game. And it was pretty easy to make his front teeth. So yeah, I do prefer the way that these turned out over the originals. I don't think I have them anymore. I threw them away, but they ended up, the clay ones didn't look good at all. So yeah, I went with this, and then I painted like a gradient, and then washed them eventually when I put them in the mouth to make them, you know, just look a bit cool. But yeah, here we're arriving to the end of the project. I originally made his eyes on a piece of paper and then put them into the eye itself, which eventually ended up not working. It was a whole mess. I ended up drawing some, but then at the end of the day, I painted them on the inside of his eye with acrylic paint, which worked out well. I took some brown shoelaces to make the stitching along his face, and then I glued those on. I used the Elmer's glue to make sure the ends wouldn't fray when I stuck them on. So those turned out pretty well. But yeah, this is basically what I did to make this mask, and he's not so bad. I mean, he's definitely different looking. Like I said, not super accurate to in-game, especially because of the way the fabric turned out. But honestly, for my first attempt, I'm not too upset. But for people who have wanted to see a mask of this character made, I hope you liked this video, even though I dealt with a lot of issues going through it, which is bound to happen with a project like this. But even then, I hope you think he looks pretty cool, and we're glad that you were able to find something like this and that I was able to make something pretty cool. He'll definitely be cool on my shelf. And he definitely looks nicer off camera, I gotta say. Anything on camera, like look, his nose, what I said earlier, it's pointed down too much. But yeah, I think about things too much. He's not too bad. But yeah, he'll be a pretty cool prop to have.